It turns out that the American system of government is actually very difficult for one man to take over, whatever he might say or whatever he might want to do.
Yeah.
So part of me thinks we should have more confidence in our own institutions.
I've been reading column after column in various American news outlets discussing obviously the real possibility that Donald Trump could emerge the next president of the United States, and discussing the possibility, as it's put, that that could lead to a form of elective dictatorship. And they're talking about the way that a new president, second-term President Trump, would order the federal government, including the Justice Department, how he'd come down on his political opponents, how he would treat dissent in the country, how judges might help him in a way that a lot of judges didn't help him to come out ahead of the American election when he claimed that he was cheated of that election. That's the argument that I'm seeing, Joe, and I gather, we all want to get your thoughts on this, I gather you don't buy this thesis, do you? Tell me if you don't, why not?
The first thing you have to understand is that we have been hearing this for years, going back to 2015 when Trump first started running for president the first time. And I think that this is key context to this because I think that the part of the trap that we are in is that Trump's critics, whatever good reasons they might have for criticizing, things that he does or says or any of the rest of it, suffer a real problem with hyperbole. So I think that one of the things to bear in mind as you're trying to dissect this latest flood of this kind of commentary is that American voters have heard it all before. And I think that, if we try to imagine what another Trump term of that happens, what it would look like, I think that you have to remember that American institutions proved very resilient the first time around. It turns out that the American system of government is actually very difficult for one man to take over, whatever he might say or whatever he might want to do.
Yeah.
So part of me thinks we should have more confidence in our own institutions. And I think, that includes recognizing that he is only one person atop a very complicated government system. I actually think that the bigger danger is that he will struggle to accomplish anything, including whatever good things the voters have elected him to do, because he's going to have trouble finding advisors, cabinet secretaries, administrative staffers who are going to be able to implement his agenda.
Well, let me put one or two of the points that are thrown behind this concern about an elective dictatorship and get your thoughts on it. I mean, if there's a second Trump term, I mean, he wouldn't have a General Mattis by his side acting as a restraining influence. There wouldn't be a General John Kelly doing the same job. There wouldn't be an Attorney General William Barr. He'd have a Justice Department full of his own hand-picked Trumpite supporters, and he's made it pretty clear that he would use the Justice Department against his political opponents. He said, I think, I'm not quoting directly, but it's pretty much something close to this. They came after me because I'm their opponent. I'll go after them. And it might be easier second time round. It would be easier second time round, arguably, if he had the right people in the Justice Department and the right people, from his point of view, in the White House.
It can cut both ways. I think that is a real danger of politicizing the justice system in that way. But then remember, Trump himself is the first former president who is under indictment in the way that he is.
Yeah.
So I think that you end up in this classic problem where the people who accuse Trump of violating norms, which he does often, are the same people who have established a precedent for violating those norms themselves. So I think that one of the dangers that would arise in a second Trump term is that actually the Biden administration has created precisely this template for using the Justice Department to pursue various prosecutions of a political opponent. So I think that, there is that danger, but against that, you also have the fact that, similar to the UK, where you have a very large civil service, which is not always on board with what the elected government at the top of the administration wants to do. You end up with a very similar situation in the US. So I think that actually, there are some areas where Trump can do real damage in a second term, but I think that he's going to find himself constrained by the fact that he will not have bureaucrats on board with that.
Okay, I want to bring Kat and Rachel in a second. But in what you just said, you advance your view that the prosecutions of Donald Trump are unfounded and politically motivated. They've been used as a political weapon. Now, what about the evidence that's being put together in support of those various cases? I mean, they're putting together of slates of false electors, which didn't work, but they were put together for use in Congress, and the pressure in Georgia for votes to be found. The litany of accusations. I mean, do these not have merit? They do seem to be grounded in evidence.
Look, I'm not defending Trump. In fact, wrote at the time that I thought that he should have been impeached over January 6th.
Yeah.
And I would very much prefer that he not be the Republican nominee
Yeah.
or the next president. So this isn't about defending Trump. This
Yeah.
is about what are you going to do about it.
Uh-huh.
And I think that in the American system, one of the problems that we've got is that historically, the remedy you had was political. You could do the political impeachment process, or you have the political remedy of not voting for the person. And I think that the issue with the indictments and the various criminal trials that are going on is that the criminal justice system is not set up to deal with these fundamentally political problems of having a figure that raises some of the questions or problems that Trump does. So that is why it was so dangerous to have gone down the path of doing these indictments in the first place, because the indictments don't solve what his opponents perceive to be the problem. If anything, this process of indicting him has emboldened him and caused more people on the right to support him because they believe that the process is unfair, whatever ills he might have committed. And at the same time, you've also now established this precedent that he could very happily use if he does win a second term to prosecute some of his political opponents.
It also seems to be the case, and there can't be an argument for or against bringing prosecutions, but he's using those prosecutions as a platform. He's going to use trials against him for electoral fraud as a platform for arguing that he was cheated of the election, and that will go down well with a lot of people who support Donald Trump. So he knows how to use an opportunity. Kat Neelan and Rachel come there for here with me. Kat.
Hi, Joe. Thanks. That's really interesting. I actually, I tend to agree with you that I know that John doesn't. That I'm not that scared about a Trump dictatorship. Although I do think you kind of paint a picture of polarization being a far bigger risk to America. But I just wondered on the issue around this sort of Trump as a dictator idea. What do you feel like the risk to journalists is like under a sort of second Trump term? Do you worry that it could sort of ratchet up from what appeared to be a fairly sort of unpleasant environment into something perhaps even dangerous?
It's hard for me to see how that would play out. And in some ways, I think that one of the dynamics which has been kind of unhealthy in American politics is that actually large sections of the media, including the left-leaning media, find that Trump is very good for business. I mean, how many left-leaning networks or newspapers found that they were actually very profitable and gaining a lot of readers or viewers during the Trump years precisely because they could present themselves as voices of resistance or opposition to his administration. So I think that, one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you hear a lot of these Jeremiads in the American media or from the commentary, cohort in the US about the potential evils of a Trump second administration, there's also probably in the back of their minds the sense that that would be pretty good for business for them.
Rachel.
Thanks, Liz. It's fascinating. I feel like there are two sort of slightly different things here. One of which is is America facing this kind of crisis, and is the prospect of a Trump dictatorship real? And the second thing is, if it is real, is it helpful for Trump's opponents to talk about it in that way and to draw attention to it? On the first point, you started off by talking about it being hyperbole to discuss it in those terms. I think it might be worth remembering that a significant number of Americans, including I think up to 70% of Republicans, believe that the 2020 election result was illegitimate, that Biden is an illegitimate president. So you do have a significant proportion of your country who have already lost faith in the electoral system, and some would argue that that has significance for what Trump might or might not be able to do. But on the point about what you do about it, the various indictments, the court cases, are for really quite serious crimes. One is for the role in inciting the January 6th insurrection. One is for keeping classified documents way past the point and that they're allowed, and that being a risk to national security. You've criticised those indictments, or said that they establish a precedent for going after past presidents that could be very unhelpful for Trump's opponents. Are you suggesting, therefore, that even if Trump broke the law, the US justice system shouldn't hold him to account like they would any other American because he happened to have been president?
Well, I think that prosecutorial discretion is a key part of the legal system in a system like America's. And I think that there is an understanding that sometimes it is wise for prosecutors to really draw a hard line and use that discretion to prosecute very aggressively. And I think that sometimes there needs to be an understanding that, particularly in these very politicized cases where inevitably it's going to be politicized, not just because he's a former president, but because he is a candidate to become president again. You have to ask yourself as a prosecutor, is it really wise, from a matter of public policy and sort of generally creating a healthy atmosphere around politics and the law, for us to involve the criminal courts and the prosecutorial system in this case at this time in this way? And so I think that's the kind of discretion that I would prefer people exercise. And that is not to downplay the seriousness of some of the things that he's accused of, particularly the classified documents case, which I think is probably the most serious of all of them, and funnily enough ends up getting kind of lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
But it is to say that I think that there is a just because someone may have committed a crime doesn't mean that it's in the best interest of the public or the political system to prosecute it at that particular moment.
Yes.
And you can make a good case that these prosecutions are actually working at cross purposes to what some of Trump's opponents would view to be the public interest, because they are having the effect of, allowing him to go out and campaign on this and rally support around him.
Yeah.